Good morning, everybody. Thanks, first of all, to Johannes, to Robert, to Clara, to Marius, and to all the student support staff. Danke für die Einladung. Okay, don't worry, this is my only German today. It's great to be here. So I'll dive right in, and my main argument today is that there are some very interesting digital renderings that are creating new markets for the extraction and capture of various kinds of value. What's interesting about these is that these markets position themselves as new, very innovative, and designed to exit from the current sort of centralized system, not only of finance and banking, but also from the state, and even from what we might call Earth 1 at this point now, because as we will see, there's sort of alternative Earths. So it could be a physical exit, but certainly a sort of variety of exits. So despite this innovation, though, I would like to suggest that these are very amenable to analysis by classic value extractive political economies. So what I think I can contribute is kind of a critical history of of AI, and more particularly in my field as a geographer, what the discipline is starting to call Geo AI and Web 3. And in terms of motivations for the research, I started thinking about this a few years ago because I'm responsible for delivering some teaching to our PhD students in geospatial. And the module is on what's called responsible research and innovation. This is a term used in Europe and in the UK. It's not quite as well known in North America, or RRI. And these students are not in social sciences, but they're in the School of Engineering, so it's been very interesting to kind of engage with them about what they understand responsible research and responsible innovation to look like. So that's sort of a short term. In the longer term, though, I'm quite interested in better understanding what forms of value are created, and this is not just monetary value as income or money rent, but other forms of production of value as well. And then in particular, for whom is this value created? So that's a little bit about the motivations. There's a number of key terms that I'll be using throughout the presentation, and just in case I'm using them in a slightly different way, or in a way it's in a new context, it may be worth briefly just outlining some of these. Some of these we've heard already from Andronik and from Joachim, so I won't talk about those ones. And but by the way, they're the experts in the room, not me. But perhaps one of the more important ones is the first one, which is the rentier economy. So we might say that this is a kind of political economic system of value extraction, where you obtain rents as income. I put rents in inverted commas, perhaps. So these may be literal rents, so when you're a landlord, but it could also be data that's extracted from social media and then monetized. And there's sort of non-monetary rents as well. Now, the key aspect, perhaps, to keep in mind is that in the rentier economy, you're extracting value without producing anything new. And then we come to some of these more technical terms. Again, I won't dwell on them because we've been hearing about them kind of all week. So, for example, in the we've had quite a lot of discussion, I think, about decentralization. And I'll just put a term here up on the screen, Web 3 or Web 3.0, which kind of captures a sort of variety of these efforts at decentralization. It's a movement away, if you like, from our current now dubbed Web 2.0 of centralized platforms. And by platforms, I'm talking about any kind of ecology of software, data and material aspects that collect value and profit out of its services. So whether we're talking about one of the sort of different acronyms here, but FAGA or FANG, so Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, but also Uber and so on and so forth. And they do this via sort of complicated, in Web3, a complicated technological means revolving around storing a token, which I think is something to pay attention to, a token or record in a database, the blockchain, that cannot be tampered with. So you can't change anything in the blockchain because it would change everything else downstream. So it's completely open for verification. So this is still an emerging market. There's sort of various ways of seeing how big it is. So here's one attempt to look at the crypto market. In the bottom left corner there, you can see that this particular valuation is $75 billion US. So it's not big in terms of the global financial market, but it's not big either. And Ethereum, one of the cryptocurrencies, better known cryptocurrencies, perhaps the second best known one after Bitcoin. You see here I'm tracking the value of one Ethereum to the dollar. So today it's worth about 2,800 or just under 3,000. So it's gone down a little bit, but since its launch, it's actually gone up quite a lot. And some of the more well-known NFTs, such as the gloriously named Bored Ape Yacht Club, that's real. So these are worth about $430,000, according to some news stories, and they're owned by people like Snoop Dogg and Madonna, and even the football player Neymar. And Bored Ape itself recently issued new stock around their other side NFT, and I think the name is indicative here. I'll come back to that. It's a kind of a new metaverse with an asking price of entry of $7,000. So this image links to a video, which I don't have time to play, but if you Google Bored Ape Other Side, you can see some of the very high production values that are around these NFTs. So they're not really gimmicks anymore. Okay, so let's unpack the relationship between rentier and urban infrastructures and technologies a little bit. And here I'm drawing on work by Jathan Sadowski and his proposal of a series of phases of a relationship between technology. So moving from urban oversight, where you have sensors throughout the city, creating smart cities perhaps, or Internet of Things, to technology actually operating urban services themselves, providing platforms like Uber, like the e-scooters that we see around. And he claims that they've now moved into a third phase of technology actually owning the city, owning spaces in the city. He sees this as sort of the most recent development. And he cites the Toronto Google or Alphabet project called Sidewalk Labs, where they tried to develop kind of a smart city environment, smart neighborhood environment. And Sadowski says this isn't just about portfolio diversification. This third phase is about gaining control and governance of the city. But all of these are still platforms, and so therefore they're still really Web 2. And the reason I'm looking at renderings is because they take us to Web 3 and exit. So what do I mean by renderings and exit? So let me unpack that a little bit. Rendering is kind of an interesting word, and I derive it from Luis's paper, who we saw earlier, a different paper is just coming out right now that he did with his co-author Giovanna Rosen on what they call the digital growth machine. And they kind of use this word rendering in passing. So I apologize to them if I'm taking this word up in a way they didn't intend. But if you look at the etymology of the word rendering in English, so it comes from this prefix andare in Latin, to give. To give. So if you look at some of the definitions in the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, we've got to give or to give back, to produce, to represent, like render an image, So there's a sense of something owed or paid out. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. And it shares the same root origin as data. German, I think you'd say datum. So, okay, one more German word. But data is that which is extracted. It's not that which is given. So some people have said, well, data is the wrong word. We should talk about capta. But nevertheless, we probably won't be talking about capta. But I think that this sort of echoes the word, the idea of data as being extraction that I'm interested in. So how did digital geographic renderings, what do they do? And I would argue that what they do is render value. So some of you may know the economist Philip Mirowski, and as he argues in this talk that I have an image of here, he says it's a little bit unusual to talk about markets because usually, apparently in economics, you're normally talking about the system, neoliberalism, or you're talking about agency, human agency or subjectivity. So markets come somewhere in the middle. So why does Mirowski talk about markets? And I think that it's because he takes seriously a key tenet of neoliberalism, that markets are a kind of information processor. They're a computer. They act very quickly. They have all this data in real time. They're kind of automatons that can make decisions not only more quickly, but better than humans. So why should we talk about these new markets? I'll suggest two things to think about. One is because these new markets that are being deployed through renderings to create value are perhaps antithetical to the production of socially useful, or coming back to this idea of responsible innovation, because they're extractive, right? And secondly, because as a geographer, they offer a fascinating kind of geopolitical reconfiguration, if you like, away from the notion of community based around people living together in a shared space or a shared geography, to what this one particular, if I may call him a crypto bro. So this guy's name is Balaji Srinivasan, and he's got a new book coming out. It's not out yet, but he's talked about it on his blog. He sort of sketched out some of the idea. So he's talking about a new geopolitics, which is a token-based community rather than a geography-based community. And he says, you know, so you can see the title of the book is How to Start a New Country. So he talks about this being a cloud country. That's his words, which is open source. And it's a discontiguous country, or as he also calls it, a fractal country. And I think this is sort of really getting at this idea of exit. So drawing here on some work by my colleagues, Harrison Smith and Roger Burrows, who wrote a fascinating paper on the politics of exit, in which they trace some of this out. So it's this sort of strategy of exit, either from government, as I said, or from centralized banking, but it could also be a physical exit from this Earth into sort of Elon Musk colonies on Mars, or of course the latest version is the metaverse. And this little picture you see here is a proposed exit to floating islands in the sea, which is called seasteading. So you'll sort of exit and found your own country. And one of the people that's invested in this quite heavily is the let's say entrepreneur Peter Thiel. I think his name has come up already this week. He's co-founder of PayPal, and he's a self-described libertarian who once wrote, "I no longer believe freedom and democracy are compatible." So in other words, if forced to choose, he's going to choose freedom. And to do that, we need to exit from our current sort of geopolitical system, financial system, by creating these new markets. And it's kind of interesting because remember Luis talked about what his project was the recuperation of the role of the state in the creation of markets, which is the sort of traditional understanding of how markets are created, because the state acts as a guarantor of a new market. So let's take, for example, the carbon credit markets, carbon offsets. So the state would act to provide entrepreneurs with a guarantee that when they trade on the market. For example, if a local city council, like where I live, Newcastle, has a goal of net zero by 2030, that if they produce carbon dioxide and they buy some offsets on the market, like that there will be a carbon scrubber built somewhere in the world, or there will be some trees built somewhere in the world, or something like that. However, Web3 is imagined as a form of exit, where it's the market itself which verifies and guarantees trust through, on the one hand, this classic neoliberal insight of the market as a computer. This derives from the work of Friedrich Hayek, the market as an information processor. And second, by forming what the French philosopher historian Michel Foucault called a site of veridiction. I don't have time to go into this today, but if you're interested, I recommend his series of lectures on neoliberalism, which is actually sort of wrongly titled in some way The Birth of Biopolitics. He doesn't talk about biopolitics in these lectures. He talks about neoliberalism, and he says the market constitutes a site of veridiction. So the word veridiction literally means truth-saying, right? So the market can say the truth. He says this is Foucault's analysis of neoliberalism. And I think if you think about the blockchain and providing cryptographic verification on the blockchain, this is a form of modern neoliberalism, despite the fact that there's all this narrative around exit or some kind of new form of market. So in the chapter, I talk about 3 examples of these renderings. I don't have time to talk about them today. Just about halfway through my presentation. So I've set the scene out for you, and I want to turn to what kinds of value is produced. You can see here with some of my sort of initial ideas about this, and pick up on NFTs, and maybe instead of the question mark, I might put that NFTs produce a new politics of exit, and the question is for whom. So I think I can play a little video here. I'll turn the sound off. So what is an NFT, right? So I kind of got interested in this because they seem so ludicrous and illogical. So I still think they're ludicrous, but I no longer think they're illogical or irrational. So briefly put, an NFT is a guarantee of authenticity of a digital document, a record, or an image that's cryptographically guaranteed on the blockchain. And those of you in the room who know much more about this than I can tell me if I've gone wrong there. So it's not the digital data itself, but a kind of certificate of authentication. Okay, so they've been around for a few years now. I think some of the earliest NFTs go back to about maybe 2015, something like that. They got a lot more notice in the past year or so, people buying pieces of art. So let me give you an example. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web, sold an NFT of the source code of his original web browser for $5.5 million last year. Okay. And then we can think about Geo NFTs, which is the video you're watching from an outfit called Earth2.io. So Geo NFTs, we might speculate, means locations which are cryptographically verified. Okay, so you could own authentically, so for example, a location. Maybe it's a special location like this room, or you could own. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what 3 words. So these are the 3 words that verify, that designate locations around the world. There are, I think, millions of them. So you could cryptographically own that. This room, for example, maybe the Shearer Foundation wants to buy that. Or you could buy your house, or you could buy something like 00 or the North Pole or something like that. You think this is sort of outlandish, but there are actually some real estate NFTs already where you can buy a so-called fractional ownership. Maybe we'll be buying and selling houses as NFTs in the future. So this little video that you just watched is from Earth2.io, and it was founded a couple of years ago, and it positions itself as a big, massive digital game, the first phase of which is buying locations or property in Earth2 as NFTs. So you could buy the Sydney Opera House and put an American flag over it. And it's based around tiles, as you perhaps saw in the video. And it's powered by the digital mapping company Mapbox. And there are 5.1 trillion 10 square meter tiles in Earth 2, of which 50 billion are purchasable. So you can buy these, you can improve on them, and so on. We might ask, what are some of the ways of either understanding this or critiquing it or providing a kind of counter-narrative? This is where I draw from some of the tradition, indeed an ethics of slowness, what we might call an ethics of slowness. So I won't go into all of these today, but I'll just point to a couple of them. The idea here is to provide a kind of a counter-narrative to the inevitabilism of machine learning and Web3, or even artificial general intelligence, and what I call an innovation narrative, that all innovation is good and should be maximized in terms of its speed and acceleration. So perhaps a counter-narrative might be that it's local, because by definition, you know, in Web3, you need to scale. In fact, there's a company called Scale, which helps companies scale up. So by definition, a slowness, an ethics of slowness would be about things, or data in this case, that is not scalable. We heard earlier from Joachim's great talk on, so HITL is human in the loop. There's also society in the loop, about the hybrids, human and machines working together for decision making. So this is an interesting idea, co-design, so on and so forth. But the other one I want to kind of point to is the ability to learn from history in order to revision the future beyond this sort of sense of inevitabilism. And so, you know, we might ask how we could develop kind of a new, I don't insist on this term, slow AI. You can call it whatever you want, counter AI. It's also known as, but how we might work in digital geography to elude or escape this extractive market. So for the right, the question is how the market can elude or exit the state. For the left, we might ask, can geographies, and specifically digital geographies, escape the market or the digital growth machine, to use Luis's term. And of course, there is a significant tradition of slowness from the slow food movement originally, the idea is not to abstain from eating in the slow food movement, but to eat more locally and to eat with respect of local traditions and ways of life. And there's quite a big literature on degrowth as well, or donut economics. It's got a lot of ideas going around about this. And in geography, we find this book, Slow Computing, for example. It's slow AI. I'll just put these up on the screen. I'm not going to talk about them in detail this morning. Mentioned some of them already, like the human in the loop, the hybrid systems. But perhaps I'll just talk briefly about the fourth one, the visioning, which I think is very important. And I'll give you an example. Here, we might recognize this image from the game Minecraft, which has been used by the United Nations Habitats, which is responsible for Sustainable Development Goal 11, Sustainable Communities and Cities. And what's great about gaming is that there's no winners and losers, and it's very playful. And so you can teach Minecraft in the morning on a Chromebook anywhere, and learn it in the morning, and then have people vision out what they want their city to look like. So I think that this kind of thing is very important, to play around with sort of different alternatives that get buy-in. So why an ethics, and what do I mean by an ethics? This can mean many things to many different people, and I've been thinking about ethics since the 1990s, and ethics and technology in particular. But recently I've been drawing on the work of Shannon Valor, who says that when we develop technology, when we develop innovations, we incur a kind of a moral debt. And it's important to pay that moral debt down by, for example, slowing down and seeing what is the dual use of the technology, or seeing how we can avoid discrimination and so on, before we rush ahead and just disruptively innovate. So it's not so much a ever quickening or acceleration, it's a slowing down to take the time for social renewal and repair, to avoid surveillance schemes and so on. So this is my last slide. Meredith Whittaker uses a very stimulating term called industry capture to refer to how big tech controls and dominates artificial intelligence, especially her research area, which is large language models. So this sort of drive to ever larger neural nets, deep learning language models. So you may have heard of GPT-3, and I saw that Meta has introduced a new one just recently. And she says that it takes courage and ethics to slow down and resist this kind of inevitabilism of industry capture, and I would say also monopolies of capture, and allow algorithms to gracefully fade into history. So let me draw a couple of brief conclusions in my last few minutes here. Slow AI, as I've characterized it, for me is a very interesting legacy of earlier work in the discipline of geography called counter mapping and critical cartography, which is already emerging in the 1990s, the early 1990s, in fact. And what's interesting about that for me is that work was not about necessarily the technology of these new GIS or digital mapping, but about the relations of power in those geospatial technologies, or the relations of power that those technologies allowed. And it's a way of turning that on its head, hence the term counter mapping, right, or counter narratives. So, what are some of the possibilities of a similar development for a counter geo AI, or slow AI, whatever you want to call it? We already see some of this. So this is a recent piece by Evgeny Morozov, who some of you may know, talking about Web3. So there's already sort of a beginning of some ideas that we can deploy about this counter narrative that provide a more critical history of Web3 markets, which is what he's doing here. We could provide a kind of a counter narrative of large language models to understand that what we're seeing now is in many ways a form of techno-capitalism or a neoliberal capitalism. And geographers really ought to have plenty to say about these things, these emerging political economies. I sort of gestured briefly to some of the new geopolitical reconfigurations that we might want to engage with. And I think that this might also allow us to expand our concept of AI beyond resource-intensive machine learning, or even digital machine learning. I'm not an expert in this, but there's some interesting work on analog computers these days and analog chips. So we have an analog computer right here, right? This timer, so analog means you've got continual variation rather than just binary digits. So it has a use, even though it's a bit worrying. So can we expand our notion of AI beyond this kind of... ever since about 2012, we've had this emphasis on deep neural networks and 100 layers and more, and it's very resource intensive, as I think it's already come up. Some of you may know this paper as well, which is now a pretty infamous critique of large language models, called stochastic parrots. So stochastic parrots are those which say much but understand little, right? And I'd also draw on the work of some of my colleagues, Agnieszka Lisinski and Sarah Elwood, who point to the importance of glitch in technology. So glitch is when something goes wrong, right? So when something goes wrong, the technology stops, slows down, and we can learn quite a lot about it from this kind of glitching that it does. So just to conclude, final comment then, slow AI perhaps points to an interesting new kind of possible politics of refusal of the grounds of the claims of machine learning and intelligence and so on that can shape legislation and avoid harms through a writing of a critical history. So I think that's where I could make some contributions into this debate. So, thank you.